It's taken a generation, but now federal benefits have become available for first responders harmed during the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, those at the Pentagon and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that is. The money was authorized in last year's National Defense Authorization bill. Federal News Network's Drew Friedman joins me as we get details now from attorney Michael Barasch of the law firm Barasch and McGarry. Mr. Barasch, good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
And this is something you have actually been pursuing almost since the day after.
Yeah, I would say right after that. Before 9/11, I represented injured New York City firefighters and cops. And I lost so many clients that day, so many friends. And then we kept hearing everybody coughing. And we soon realized that 9/11 didn't end on 9/11. And for the first responders and for all the downtown residents in Lower Manhattan, for the guys at the Pentagon, it still hasn't ended. Not a day goes by without two of my clients dying of 9/11 related illnesses.
Let's talk about that National Defense Authorization Act. What did it actually say and do, and what does this tell us more about what's available now?
Let's start with the Pentagon. For some reason, the responders at the Pentagon weren't covered by the World Trade Center Health Program, which was one of the two programs created when Congress passed the Zadroga Health and Compensation Act. And yes, I know that nearly all the people who died on 9/11 were in New York, but it was a terrible name to call it the World Trade Center Health Program because it completely dismissed the people who died, the people who got sick at the Pentagon and at Shanksville. So it's still called the World Trade Center Health Program, the second program being the Victim Compensation Fund. Both programs have been permanently extended. We'll talk about it in a minute, but the health program still needs additional funding. But now at least responders at the Pentagon and at Shanksville are covered if, God forbid, they get sick from a 9/11 related illness, which now includes, by the way, 69 cancers and a host of respiratory illnesses linked to the carcinogens in concrete dust and jet fuel.
Thanks, Michael. And can you talk a little bit about how they get access to that coverage and what exactly the benefit provides for these first responders?
Okay, great question. Well, so the first payment is always by your private insurance company. If you're retired, which many guys and gals are now 23 years later, then Medicare would be your first payment. But if you're certified with a 9/11 illness, and again, there's so many illnesses that are now presumed linked, and please remind me to talk a little bit about the presumptions that NIOSH has made, then the health program will pick up all the co-pays, all the deductibles. I'm sure you've heard horror stories about people who have insurance, and that insurance just wasn't enough to cover the care of chemotherapy and cancer treatment. It can cripple a family. So having the health program pick up that additional coverage is just fabulous for the 9/11 community.
How much money is available, and what's your experience been on what it actually costs these responders, for their health care and whatever?
Well, if they are certified for an illness, now, for instance, let's say they're in an accident and they break their leg playing basketball or riding a bike, the health program obviously does not cover that, but it does cover the cost of asthma, reactive airways disease, mental illness treatment. I can't tell you, Tom, how many men and women suffer from PTSD, which I know a lot of people feel is kind of fake, but it's not fake. These people, I speak to them every single day, and anxiety and depression still haunt this population today, 23 years later. So the cost of these treatments, the cost of medication can be overwhelming, and having the support of NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which oversees the World Trade Center Health Program, is of critical importance. But no one predicted just how much medical inflation was going to impact the 9/11 community. So we are about $3 billion short for the health program. But ironically, once you're certified by the health program with a 9/11 illness, then the Victim Compensation Fund will pay up to $250,000 for your cancer, will pay your lost income if you're ever found disabled due to your illness, and God forbid you die of a 9/11 illness, they'll pay your family on average about $300,000-$400,000. So it's kind of like a cancer insurance policy for the 9/11 community.
We're speaking with attorney Michael Barasch, who specializes in 9/11 claims. How many people do you think are left that might be eligible that have not received compensation?
So far we know that about 120,000 people are in the World Trade Center health program. However, and by the way, I give a lot of credit to the unions for educating their members because they are the vast majority of the health program. Sadly, it's the civilians, including, by the way, federal employees who were breathing the same toxic dust. Not surprisingly, they're coming down with the same illnesses, they're dying of the same illnesses, and less than 10% of the civilians are in the program. And to answer your question, how many people? Well, it's estimated that there were approximately 500,000 people in Lower Manhattan exposed to the World Trade Center toxins, probably thousands of others at the Pentagon, and far fewer, of course, at Shanksville. But they're all eligible, but they have to enroll. And if they enroll, they have to prove that they were there, which isn't that hard. But every year that goes by, it gets more and more difficult because you have to find your witnesses who can say, oh, I saw Michael. I sat next to Tom. Yes, I know he was working downtown. Or yes, I know he was at the Pentagon participating in the recovery and the rescue operations. And that's why I always tell healthy people, protect yourselves, protect your families. Don't leave it to your families to try to find your witnesses after you're gone. And don't leave it to yourself to do this if you get a terrible diagnosis that you've got stage 4 cancer. That's not when you want to start the process of finding witnesses. But it's a non-adversarial program. Both of them are non-adversarial. But we're talking about the federal government. They want to make sure that if they're giving free health care to people, if they're giving compensation to people, that these people were really exposed to the toxins, either in the World Trade Center below Canal Street or at the Pentagon.
Now, is it possible that some of these first responders from 9/11 maybe don't know that some illness that they have is actually connected to those events? And how are you trying to spread awareness that, you know, maybe there is a connection and they can be eligible for these benefits?
When Congress passed the Zadroga Health and Compensation Act, and by the way, I just have to interrupt myself by telling you, it was named after my client, Detective James Zadroga, who was with the NYPD. Jimmy died of pulmonary fibrosis at the age of 34. And when they did his autopsy, they found in his lung tissue ground glass, asbestos, chromium, lead, benzene. These are all known carcinogens. Well, we showed the results of this autopsy to NIOSH, and they had been doing their own air sampling, both at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Center. And they put 2 and 2 together and realized, wow, there is a 9 to 41% increase in cancers in the 9/11 community, which is considered medically significant. So they said there's a presumption. So if you develop breast cancer, if you develop prostate cancer, which are 2 of the most common cancers, the most common cancer, of course, being skin cancer, because that concrete dust that was in the air when the buildings were burning had the pH level of Drano. So if you ever develop cancer anytime between now and 2090, you don't have to prove by having a doctor testify. All you have to do is show you were exposed and you developed cancer. That's it.
It's very similar to the approach Veterans Affairs then has taken with Agent Orange.
Yes, great analogy. And they don't want it to be adversarial. They want you to make the claim. But so many people aren't connecting the dots. They might think, oh, my mother had breast cancer. Therefore, what could how I was at the Federal Plaza working at 250 Broadway. How could my breast cancer be related when my mother had it? Or I'm Irish. I have very white skin, fair skin. My skin cancer was probably caused because I was outside all the time. You don't have to prove it with a doctor. All you have to do is, again, prove you were there below Canal Street or at the Pentagon. Prove that you develop this cancer, and the government will give you this health care that you deserve and give you compensation that you're entitled to.
Now, we've been speaking